Hey everyone, Jay Whitner here with Space Headlines. We do a quick overview of what's going on in space each week. And today we'll be talking about the first week of November 2019. Our first story is NASA funding. The Senate passed a $22.8 billion NASA funding bill for fiscal 2020. And it does include most of the supplemental funding that was requested by the White House for the Artemis mission, the human lunar return mission. However, it seems very likely that we're going to be faced with a continuing resolution in Congress, which basically blocks new funding, and that would probably extend out to February, March, perhaps even April. So if that should happen, the new funding wouldn't be available for much or all of the first quarter of the year, which would delay our ambitions to return to the moon. Assuming that we do get the full funding for Artemis and that all moves forward, Kennedy Space Center will get a lot of activity from this, and will end up issuing a lot of contracts, roughly $7 billion of contracts that are related to logistical support, primarily for Artemis. And it appears that most of this money would go to local firms, Florida firms, to provide support to Kennedy Space Center as part of this effort. So this would be a great thing for Florida's economy for many, many years to come. Boeing did an abort test of their Starliner spacecraft. And the test was viewed generally as being successful. The craft flew and landed. There was one obvious issue that did occur during the test, and the craft, the Starliner, uses three main parachutes for its landing, and one of the three parachutes failed to deploy in the test, which obviously is a safety concern. However, the craft is designed to land safely on two parachutes. So if there had been crew aboard the ship, it would have been okay, but it's certainly something that will bear more investigation on why that parachute failed to open, because while two is acceptable, one certainly is not. We're coming up on a Falcon 9 launch that will be very significant. The launch represents the second main installation of Starlink satellites. Another 60 Starlink satellites will be carried into space with this mission. And this, of course, is their internet service constellation, which would provide a low latency and eventually worldwide service. But there are two other really important firsts about this mission. If everything goes as planned, this will be the very first time that a first stage of the Falcon 9 has been reused for a fourth time. So another step forward on the reusability front. And for the very first time ever, the fairings, the nose cone of the rocket, will be using recycled fairings, which cost millions of dollars to build the fairings. So this is a substantial cost issue to begin recycling the fairings. So this is a big step forward on multiple fronts for SpaceX. Elon Musk made some comments regarding the upcoming Starship. And the comments were basically that he felt like the cost of a flight, the direct operational cost of a flight of the Starship, could go as low as $2 million a flight, with roughly half of that being propellants and half of it other direct expenses. Now, he didn't really expand on this too much, but in terms of background for the audience, this direct costing would not include the overhead from SpaceX. They got over 6,000 people work there. So a lot of overhead costs would presumably be allocated to each flight in some method. And there's also going to be a significant difference between what it costs SpaceX to do a launch and what they charge for the launch. So I've already heard people talking about, wow, what could we do if we could get a flight for only $2 million? Well, that's not going to be the sales price of these flights. but it does bode well that prices could be quite reasonable. The Office of Management and Budget came out with some comments. They sent a letter to Congress, and they basically said that the full funding is going to be needed if we're going to return to the moon by 2024, which makes perfect sense. It's an aggressive timeline, so we'll need to provide the appropriate resources to NASA if we want them to get this done. They also had some comments about the Space Launch System that I hadn't seen before in this exact way, but they're saying that once the Space Launch System has been fully developed, it's going to cost over $2 billion per flight of the Space Launch System. And they went on to say that maybe in some cases we could use commercial launchers instead of the Space Launch System to save money, which I think that part makes sense. So we'll need to keep an eye on both the lunar return and the high costs of utilizing the Space Launch System. That's it for Space Headlines, covering the first week of November. Hope you enjoyed our show. Check back with us in a week or so, and we'll be talking about the second week of November. We'll see you then.